Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Catherine Bryla, and I am joined here tonight by other team members from Sag Moraine. I will be giving this presentation along with Peggy Connor, who should be popping on any time now. Thank you all for participating. We're really looking forward to this conversation about why native plants are important and how to get started planting native and what are some good native plants to plant. So thank you for joining us. Everybody, here's Peggy as well. And we will be kind of bouncing back and forth. I'll be starting the presentation. I get to give all the bad news right up front, and then Peggy comes on and she gives some good news to kind of lighten things up a little bit. So I'm going to get started.
Welcome, everybody. We're very excited to be here with you tonight.
So who are we? Sag Moraine Native Plant Community. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are in the southwest and near west suburbs of Chicago. And our motto is restoring our environment one plant at a time. What we promote at Sag Moraine, we're not trying to ask people to remove all of their lawn or to make a prairie in their front yard. We're just asking people to make some conscious choices to add some native plants back to their home or business landscape and maybe remove a little bit of their lawn along the way. Our mission is to advocate for the use of native plants in residential, commercial, and public landscapes. Oh, and by the way, did I mention we're an all-volunteer organization? We're just a lot of people who are very passionate about helping our environment through native plants and ecological landscaping. Our mission, in fact, is to advocate for the use of native plants in residential, commercial, and public landscapes. And we believe that native plants are the foundation of our food chain and must become more widely utilized to improve the ecosystems that sustain life. We strive to provide a fun, friendly, and welcoming environment for all who share our commitment to restoring native plants to our community. And we're rude to the people that don't. Just kidding. So what do we do?
And I do it all the time. I better watch my expressions over here.
So what the heck do we do? We do in-person and online learning opportunities such as this. We go around to organizations, clubs, park districts, libraries, giving talks, both remotely and in person now, to basically anybody that'll listen about the need to plant more native and why that's so important. We do a lot of community outreach, reaching out to some of our suburbs and towns and organizations to start getting on board with planting more native. We assist people in obtaining and selecting native plants. Tonight will be part of that help of selecting native plants that will be good for your landscape. We'll be having our plant sale on June 4th at Moraine Valley Community College. So that will be a great place to obtain native plants if you are so inclined. We do garden project sponsorship and oversight. We are going to be putting in a community garden along with the Tinley Park Environmental Commission in Tinley Park at the Village Hall on June 18th. And we're putting in a community native garden at the Burbank Public Library on June 11th. We hope to, in the future, plan more nature appreciation experiences for both adults and children, and maybe even some social activities out and about in the great outdoors and nature. A few terms I want to discuss before we really get rolling here. We talk about native plants and we talk about how native plants are the foundation of a healthy ecosystem. So what really is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is, and I need to move the little pictures here so I can read this. An ecosystem is a geographic area where plants, animals, organisms, and weather interconnect. So what is a native plant? What are these native plants that we keep talking about? A native plant is a part of the balance of nature that has developed over hundreds or thousands of years in a particular region. A non-native plant, by contrast, is one that has been introduced with human help, intentionally or accidentally, to a new place or habitat where not previously found. One of the things that we try to do at Sag Moraine is be advocates for native plants and for the fact that they are not weeds. Somewhere along the line, those words became interchangeable. Native plants meant wildflowers meant weeds. A weed is a plant, native or non-native, that is not valued in the place where it is growing. And interestingly, most common weeds are non-native plants. We love this quote at Sag Moraine. We have this on the homepage of our website. We cannot, in fairness, rail against those who destroy the rainforest or threaten the spotted owl when we have made our own yards uninhabitable. It's our choice. We can add more native plants to our environment and create a healthier ecosystem, more beneficial insects and pollinators, abundant birds, a balanced food chain, more abundant production of fruits and vegetables, improved air quality and reduced carbon, more purified water and less soil erosion, and a balanced ecosystem equals less occurrence of disease. Or we can continue on the road that we're on, where we have fewer and fewer native plants in our environment, a more unhealthy ecosystem with fewer beneficial insects and pollinators, fewer birds, an unbalanced food chain, a deficient production of fruits and vegetables, reduced air quality, increased carbon, poor quality of water and soil erosion issues, and an unbalanced ecosystem equals more occurrence of disease. I told you I get all the bad news, and then Peggy comes in like the savior and starts talking about the good news. But anyway, so one of the key reasons why native plants are so important is because our pollinators need native plants, and we need our pollinators. Pollinators are responsible. We always think of pollinators when we think of our food production, and that is extremely important. But it's almost the icing on the cake when you talk about what our pollinators do. When you think about the fact that pollination is key to the production of oxygen. If we don't have pollinators, we don't breathe. Pollinated plants sequester carbon. It's more and more research is finding that our drastic decline in pollinators is a major cause of climate change. Pollinated plants help to purify water and prevent erosion. Pollinated plants return moisture to the atmosphere, which creates our weather. Our pollinators include butterflies, moths, bees, flies, beetles, and birds. However, bees are our most efficient pollinators by far. So two types of bees that we will encounter out in our yards are European honeybees and our native bees. European honeybees, as they are non-native, they came from Europe. They require unnatural industrialized bee farming. We have bee farmers who raise these bees in large hives, like you see in the picture on the left, and travel around with their hives to our farms to pollinate our crops. Now, this is a precarious situation because, as you know from recent years, there has been problems with colony collapse disorder and other fungal diseases plaguing these honeybees, and some years are better than others for them. But why are there no native bees there? Why do we have to bring in these hives of European honeybees? And I'm not taking anything away from the European honeybees. We need them in our agricultural areas, because the way we farm, we have killed off or eliminated our native bees in those areas. We do monoculture, huge agricultural fields of one crop, soybean, corn. There's no native plants around that our native pollinators need to reproduce. Our bees can they can feed off of a number of flowering plants, but a good majority of our native bees, our pollinators, need the native plants with which they co-evolved over hundreds and thousands of years to feed their larvae. So even though they can feed on some of our non-native plants, they can't reproduce well without those native plants. So if you look at these farm fields that have none of our native plants around, obviously there's going to be no sustenance for our native pollinators to reproduce, and therefore they have died out of these areas. Now, our native bees, on the other hand, almost all of our native bee species are solitary and rarely sting. The exception to that would be our bumblebees, but even they are not near as aggressive as the honeybees because their hives are much smaller. Most native bees are very peaceful and they rarely sting. In fact, many of them don't even have a stinger. We really try to be advocates and PR people for our bees because unfortunately, European honeybees and even more so yellow jackets have caused our native bees to get a bad name. It usually is not our native bees that are causing the problem in stinging. It's usually it's yellow jackets or wasps. And we need these bees. I mean, their numbers are drastically declining. There's many varieties that have already gone extinct, and we just can't afford to lose any more. And our native bees are about 3 times more efficient at pollination than European honeybees. In fact, one of our types of native bees, our mason bee, which is out and about right now, one mason bee can do the pollination of 250 honeybees. This is a mason bee on my thumb. This guy doesn't even have a stinger. He's not going to sting you. He's perfectly, wonderfully peaceful bees. And they're out about for about 6 to 8 weeks in the spring, mostly pollinating a lot of our fruit trees and probably the most efficient pollinator we have out there. Here's some of the foods that bees help provide for us through pollination. You can see how cute he is. Wouldn't sting a soul. Now I want to talk about some of our other insects, because even though bees are by far our most efficient pollinators, the many other insects are critical to pollination, but more so to our food chain. Our food chain depends on insects. Native plants and insects are the base of our food chain. And guess what? Insects need native plants to breed and feed. You can see here, we have photos of the Monarch Butterfly caterpillar on Milkweed and the Monarch Butterfly. Now, I don't know if you've all heard in the news in recent years, Monarch Butterfly numbers alone have declined. We have in the slide 90%. As of last year, I heard numbers of about 96%. And this species will go extinct unless we all make a concerted effort to help them out. And how do we help the monarch butterflies out? By planting milkweed, because the only plant that the monarch butterfly can lay its egg on and the caterpillar form and feed off of is milkweed. As we've taken milkweed out of our landscapes through increased agriculture, housing, urban sprawl, we've decimated the monarch butterfly population. And Illinois, by the way, is a key state in this because monarch migration goes right through the state of Illinois. So getting more milkweed planted in Illinois is critical to help these guys. But these guys are basically just the poster child for what's going on in the insect world. This is going on all over the insect world. These beneficial insects, specifically butterflies and moths, are so critical to our ecosystem, but most of them need the native plants that they have co-evolved with over hundreds or thousands of years for their young, for their larvae to feed. Without those native plants present, they can't reproduce, and then they start to die out, which is what we've been seeing in the last few decades, a massive die-off of these insects. Now, why? I mean, and here's some pictures that, I mean, I remember as a kid 5 years ago, scenes like this. No, decades ago, I mean, you would go out in your yard and you would see tons of fireflies at night. Well, we've decimated our firefly population largely because of leaf blowers, because firefly larvae overwinter in leaf litter. So as we've removed all the leaves, we're throwing out the larvae of fireflies with it. It used to be common to see caterpillars crossing a sidewalk. It used to be common to see moths flying around a streetlight. How often do you see that anymore? You can look up at your streetlights now and probably see next to no moths because there just aren't as many left. There's not as many out there. It used to be common to see our native ladybugs, or even these, what we used to call when I was a kid, roly-poly bugs, which are actually pill bugs, and you don't see near as many of those anymore. Their numbers are decreasing, and they're providing great ecosystem service by breaking down organic matter and cleaning up our environment and making our soils fertile. So you don't see too many scenes like this anymore. So what's causing this insect apocalypse? Lawn chemical and pesticide use. Habitat loss, like a yard like this. I mean, yes, we have urban sprawl, but we could have habitat in this yard. All we have in this yard that's pictured is lawn, which doesn't provide any ecosystem service. But again, we're not saying get rid of your lawn. If you have kids, if you have pets, you need lawn. But how about just making it a little bit smaller and adding some plants in that are actually going to help out our ecosystem? And introduce invasive plant species have created a huge problem for our insect population, and Peggy will be talking more about that later. If all insects on Earth disappeared, within 50 years, all life on Earth would end. If all human beings disappeared from the Earth, within 50 years, all forms of life would flourish. So now I want to talk a little bit about birds, because I mentioned how important butterflies and moths are to our ecosystem. And the reason they're so critical to our ecosystem is what comes one up the food chain, and that's our birds. And birds are an easier sell. You know, we try to convince people that insects are nice and they're important and they're critical, and they're actually, some of them are kind of cute if you look at them. I know you're thinking, what a weirdo, but really they are. Birds are an easier sell. They're cheerful, they're sweet, their sound makes us feel good. It's all happy. They're soft. We can see their eyes, so they seem more real to us. But what we forget is how critical they are. Birds provide essential ecosystem services that we could not get by without. What do? They keep destructive agricultural pet insects in check. They're responsible for the pollination of some flowering plants. They're responsible for they help prevent disease through waste removal. They're kind of many species of birds are our garbage men of our natural world, waste removers. They help spread seeds that restore ecosystems. There are farmers of our natural lands, and they help to store carbon and keep the climate stable by sustaining our natural landscapes. They're critical. We could not get by without birds. We need birds, birds need insects, and guess what? Insects need native plants. So the reason why butterflies and moths are so important is because they're young, again, that are feeding off of native plants in our environment. Their young are called caterpillars. Caterpillars are the most nutritious and important food source for nesting birds. According to Doug Talamy, it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise one clutch of young chickadees. If there are not enough caterpillars around to feed birds, they either won't have young, or they'll have young and won't have enough food to feed them, and the young die in the nest. So not as many will survive, or they won't have as many. So for this reason, our bird population is declining rapidly. I want to say we've lost, what is the statistics, Peggy, 3 billion birds in the last few decades?
Yeah, over 3 billion birds, and it's getting worse, not better.
Right.
It's escalating.
Tragic. Here's a diagram of our food chain. You can see on here that native plants are important for birds and are important for insects, but then look at how everything else just needs those birds and those insects. The native plants also help out our herbivores. The herbivores are helped out by the birds for planting our natural areas. The carnivores eat the birds, the carnivores eat the herbivores. And so there you go on that side of the food chain. Now on our side of the food chain, the native plants are important for the insects and the birds. The birds eat the insects. The insects are necessary to pollinate our crops. Humans eat those crops. Those crops feed the livestock. So as you can see, both sides of the food chain all come down to, at the base, native plants. Okay, so that's all pretty depressing. Our insects, our pollinators, our birds are dying out from lack of native plants and loss of habitat. However, there is good news, and I'm going to turn it over to Peggy.
So again, thanks all of you for joining us tonight. And I do get the fun part of this because we can do something. What can we do? And the next slide, Kathy. Kathy's our slide person over there. So this is what we can do. Plant native. As you saw, it's at the very bottom of the food chain, the most necessary thing we have. But one thing I wanted to re-emphasize, and Kathy mentioned it earlier, our motto is restoring the environment one plant at a time. So we're not asking you to just fill, every nook and cranny of your yard with native plants. We just need to plant some. And I think once you plant them, once you see these beautiful, absolutely gorgeous flowers in your backyards or front yards, you'll want to plant more. And the other thing that's important is not to reduce lawn completely, because we do have children and pets. But if you add to your existing landscapes, when there's a bare spot, add some native plants. If you have to add a shrub, add a native shrub. If you have to replace a tree or want to grow a tree, choose a native species, not a cultivar or non-native species, because oftentimes they have no value to the ecosystem and they also can become invasive, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So again, plant native. Why? They're beautiful. They're essential to our ecosystem. They're easy to care for, ultimately require less water. You really have to water them for maybe 1 up to maybe 3 years. And then they're pretty much on their own with our rainwater. I mean, you might have to water in between, but not like you have to do our cultivars. They're absolutely designed for our climate. They've been here for centuries and have been adapted to our soil. The one thing I wanted to mention before we go further too is if you could grab a pen and a piece of paper and jot down we're going to be going through some specific plants. So you can jot down the plants that are of interest to you, or even take a screenshot with your iPhone or camera or Android. So that's an easy way to kind of keep track of what may interest you and what you may want to plant next. Next slide, Kathy. So one of the most important, if we go back one more, one of the important websites we want to share with you is the NWF. It's the Native Wildlife Federation. And they have a wonderful, wonderful website, and where you can actually find the appropriate plants for that are native, number one, that can be host plants for butterflies and moths, and they are ideal for your zip code and soil level, those sorts of things. So I encourage you, it's a very simple website. You have to just basically put in your zip code and it will come out with all types of great ideas. So again, nwf.org Native Plant Finder. And Mary is putting that on some of the links that you might want to have later. Okay, thanks, Kathy. Next slide. All right, when you're planning your garden, or when you're deciding on what plants or native plants to include, we asked you to consider keystone plants. Every ecosystem has certain species that are critical to the survival of other species in the system. And without them, the ecosystem may not survive. And that's what is known as a keystone plant species. Next slide, please. These are some examples, prime examples of the keystone plant species that are here in Illinois, in our area. And the #1 keystone plant, and we can't tout its benefits enough, is the oak tree. And there's a lot of different species of oak. There's about 156 different species of oaks, and they just, I'm losing the number. I think it's 458 species of insects live in oaks. So it's absolutely the king of the plants, the native plants, the king of the forest. So other keystone plant species in our area are the plum cherry, the willow tree, not the weeping willow, just the native willow, the birch tree, the red maple, goldenrod. These are some of the forbs or perennials: goldenrod, sunflower, this wild strawberries you can see in that picture on the left, false indigo, which is lead plant, which is on the bottom, and then Joe Pye, which our pollinators just love, all these plants and shrubs and trees. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to go into some individual plants that are ideal, that have been selected for our area. And I'm going to go over some of the how do I say it, just the criteria and what these plants are like.
Can I add something here?
Really
Peg?
Yeah.
Can I just add something here? So what we've done is we've picked out some native plants. You know, we're talking about smaller suburban landscapes, whether it's people's homes, yards, front yards, businesses. And there's a number of native plants that are beautiful in the prairie. But when we're talking about our suburban landscapes, if we're going to get a lot of people on board, we don't want our neighbors complaining. We don't want our town complaining. And we may not ourselves want 10-foot plants in our front yard. So, but there are a ton of native plants that are absolutely beautiful and very conducive in size and habit to our smaller suburban landscapes. And that's what we have chosen to many of these we've chosen to highlight tonight.
Great, thanks, Kathy. Okay, one of the first ones is the blue false indigo, and I mean, it's a spectacular looking plant. It's a large bush-like perennial. It can range from 3 to 5 feet tall. It's perfect for our suburban gardens, which tend to be a little bit more formal. Upright stems with deep blue flowers, full to part sun, and it's got a fairly good blooming system, June and July. It's absolutely loved by pollinators and hummingbirds. It also is a caterpillar host plant, which basically means that caterpillars can lay their eggs on it, and the larvae and caterpillars will eat the plant. And I'm going to add this right now before I forget it. So when you see your plants out there with little holes in them, don't worry that it's disease or you're going to lose your plant. That is a sign that you have a healthy garden. And that's because the insects and the caterpillars are eating that, but they're smart enough that they're never going to kill a plant. They're never going to kill their food source. So you might not remember, a lot of plants have been developed just for perfection. Native plants aren't to be absolutely perfect in any way because they are a food source for our pollinators. So keep that in mind. And this is also a keystone plant. And interestingly enough, a lot of native plants, I think there's only one, are not liked by deer at all. So if you're living in a place where there may be deer coming into your garden or your yard, they're very deer resistant. So that's good to know. Now rabbits, you still have to, rabbits love everything. So we don't have too many things. You still have to kind of monitor your plants with rabbits. But but they are deer resistant for the most part. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a butterfly weed. This is just one of the many milkweeds that Kathy described earlier. The monarch butterfly needs to lay its eggs on these plants. There's a number of different species of these. It's a low-mounded plant. It has bright orange flowers. There's other ones like swamp milkweed, which have a pink flower, but they're a very showy specimen. They grow to 2 feet tall. They're really gorgeous. Again, the monarchs love them, and you'll see caterpillars on them, and it just adds to the liveliness of the plant to see the caterpillars on them. It's full sun. It's well-drained soil. Again, mentioned the host plant to the monarch. It attracts other varieties of butterflies, hummingbirds, and other pollinators. And it has a very long bloom system, a bloom season of June through August. Next slide, please. This is a native columbine, and this is an earlier blooming flower. It's actually going to bloom now, May to June. If we ever get some sun, that's a big question here. But it's really a cool flower because it's a bell-shaped flower, and it's a very adaptable plant that can grow from full sun to shade. So if you have some shade in your yard and you want a very unusual, beautiful flower, pick this. It's the interesting thing too is it's red, and a lot of native plants aren't red. There's only a few that have a red color. Most of them are beautiful blues, variety of purples, different shades of yellows and oranges, but there's only a few that have this bright red color. So keep that in mind. Again, it's a host plant. It's loved by hummingbirds and pollinators. Next slide, please. Here's a black-eyed Susan. This is a wonderful, wonderful forb or perennial. This is bright, showy. It's easy to grow. It is a very, very long bloom system, June through the entire month of September. It grows about 1 to 2 feet tall, full to part sun, medium soil, and it's very drought tolerant. So keep that in mind for those places that you're just not going to get to water all the time. It attracts birds, butterflies, and pollinators. The bird love the seed heads of it, and that's what feeds them in the winter. It's also a host plant. Gorgeous flower. All right, this is switchgrass. So there's some grasses that are really essential to our pollinators, and this is a very lovely one because it grows 3 to 6 feet tall. It's upright. It has a golden autumn color and seed heads in August and September. It can take dry to moist soil, full sun, and it provides habitat and food for birds. And it's a butterfly host plant, and it's very upright in the winter when a lot of plants are falling over. The lead plant, again, that's a keystone plant we mentioned, and I have a little dog barking. I hope it's not going to distract anybody. I beg your pardon. She's been sleeping until now. Of course, I'm talking, although she's deaf, but we can't figure that out. Anyways, the lead plant's a keystone plant in our area. It's beautiful purple flowers and silver gray foliage. It grows, again, they're well maintained, 2 to 3 feet tall, full sun, medium to dry soil. It's an extremely long-lived woody shrub, and it's one of the few true shrubs of Illinois native landscape. Blooms June and July, butterfly host plant, and loved by the pollinators. Gorgeous plant. Sorry. Foxglove beard's tongue. This again is tubular flowers that hummingbirds and mason and bumblebees love. You'll see the little bees go in, and you'll see their little rear ends hanging out of these things. Are very cute, especially long-tongued bees. They grow about 2 to 3 feet tall. It's white, which would be a beautiful flower in some parts of your yard. Full to part sun, medium to moist soil, June and July. And it's just a great plant for pollinators, and also a butterfly, not a hot plant. It's a butterfly host plant, although it's kind of a hot plant too. So it's beautiful. So next slide, please. Thank you, Lulu, for quieting down. I appreciate that. This is a prairie drop seed, and this again is another native grass that works well in any type of landscape. And again, when we talk about landscapes, talk about suburban, urban yards, um, schools, commercial property, uh, little areas of the parks, and that sort of thing. So this works well in a lot of different landscapes. It as all these flowers. I mean, forbs and shrubs and trees that we're talking about. This grows about 2 feet tall, full sun. It's attractive flowering panicles appear in August to September. They actually have a very pleasant fragrance. It's a host plant for pollinators. And again, the birds utilize the seeds in winter, which is really helpful because um, there's not much food in the winter for our birds. So if we can keep some plants up to help them survive and thrive, that's really great news. Next slide, please. All right, I love this picture. Kathy and I both found this picture and we just adore it because it's such a remarkable picture from the bottom up. It's actually an iconic native Illinois flower. It's called the Prairie Blazing Star. It has beautiful spikes of lavender flowers. It's about 3 feet tall, full sun, medium to moist soil, and this is a late summer bloom, which is really nice because so many of our flowers are fading by then. Here's a flower that will get you through our late summers. It's a host plant for a very rare, glorious flower moth. One thing I want to mention about moths, sometimes people get, what moths? What about moths? All you think about is them eating your sweaters, or making a hole in some fabric. Moths are our most important evening or night pollinator. That's when they do their pollination, is in the night, during the night. So they're incredible pollinators too. So keep that in mind when you see your moths. You want to see moths. So that's a good thing. It's again a healthy environment and ecosystem. This attracts butterflies, pollinators, and birds. It's loved by the hummingbirds. So keep that in mind if you're a hummingbird fan. Here's another grass, native grass. It's a highly ornamental because it has blue-green foliage. It's very unusual. It's upright, densely mounded, 2 to 3 feet tall, so very manageable. And it has a reddish bronze color in fall and winter. This is not recommended for clay soil, so pick the soil well. You might have to amend your soil with compost and other soils. So just keep that in mind if you're interested in this. Full sun, and again, it's host plant for many butterflies. Next slide, thank you. The wild geranium, this is just an incredible woodland wildflower, and this really will form nice clumps. It works very well as a ground cover. It has bright lavender flowers in the spring. It's one of the early signs of spring. We haven't seen it yet, but it's coming soon. And it has very attractive foliage all throughout all the seasons, through spring through fall. It grows about 1 to 2 feet tall. I've never seen it grow as tall as 2 feet. Usually it's about 1 foot max. But this is really an ideal plant for part shade to shade. So it works very, very well under in your understory, underneath your trees. It prefers dry to medium soil, and it's a great spring pollinator plant. The common name is called cranesbill. One of the things, again, to mention is the spring pollinators. That's when, as Kathy mentioned, the mason bees come out, our early pollinators are coming out, and we need spring flowers, and there's not a whole lot. There are some that we see just emerging now, but in native plants, you need to be very specific about planting early spring and all season flowers. So that's what we encourage too in your gardens, plant some spring, summer, as well as fall plants. So the pollinators have pollen and nectar throughout the seasons. This is also a host plant. Golden Alexander is just a beautiful yellow, bright yellow flower. It's long blooming, again, another spring plant, 1 or 2 feet tall. And this is on the opposite of the blue stem. This is great for heavy clay soil. So if you don't need a blue stem or don't want a blue stem because of your clay soil, get a golden Alexander. It's full sun to partial shade. It blooms May and June, again, the early part of spring, a very low maintenance plant, butterfly host, and attracts pollinators. You can see the sort of the trend here. Host plants, pollinators, host plants, pollinators. That's why these plants were selected, and that's what's going to improve our ecosystem. Next plant, please, Kathy. Next plant is a New England Aster. This is one of my favorites, although I have a lot of favorites, but this is stunning when it's in blue with this deep violet at the yellow center, golden center. It's large and showy. It can grow 3 to 6 feet tall. And maybe, Kathy, you want to talk about that too in a minute. Why don't you jump in here now, because you have experience with this. Unmute, unmute. Unmute, unmute. Turn your mic on. There.
Yeah, muting in case my dog starts barking. But yes,
Right.
the New England Aster is a gorgeous plant. And man, when this thing is blooming in the late summer, early fall, it's loaded with pollinators. It can get very tall. It can get 6 feet tall. But what you can do is cut it down by 1/2 in late June. And that way you'll have a much shorter plant, and it's not going to form its flower buds until later in the summer. So you can cut it in half in late June and you'll have a much smaller plant. But really a pollinator magnet, likes full to part sun. It does like the soil on the moisture side, medium to moist, and it too is a pollinator host plant, butterfly host plant. Now the swamp milkweed, this is my favorite species of milkweed.
So Kathy, you're going to take over from here. That's fine. Just go ahead. Okay.
So this is swamp milkweed. This is our my favorite species of milkweed for our monarch butterfly. It has these large rosy pink flowers. It's not aggressive and somewhat, it's not overly aggressive like some people can complain the common milkweed is. This does not pose a problem. It grows up to 4 feet tall. It does have a beautiful vanilla type fragrance, and it blooms June, July, August. I probably had at least 30 monarch butterflies born on my, or feeding on my milkweed, and my swamp milkweed last year. It's just amazing how they come to it. Thrives in medium to wet soil. Again, critical host plant for the monarch butterfly, but also loved by other pollinators as well. And Peggy mentioned how there's not a lot of red native plants, and this is probably one of our most striking red native plants, the Cardinal Flower, which the brilliant red flowers. It's irresistible to hummingbirds. It's a native wetland plant, and it grows 2 to 4 feet tall and full to part sun. So if you have an area that is moist, but with some sun, this might be a good choice for you. It is a self-seeder, so, but not aggressive. So it will spread a little bit, but it won't be it won't like move all over your yard. It's loved by butterflies, and it is also a host plant. This is probably my favorite species of aster, is the smooth aster. This is a hardy plant that can bloom into November, and it's smothered with these beautiful lavender star-like flowers. It's an upright plant, grows 2 to 4 feet tall, and it is one of the least aggressive asters. There are some asters that have gotten a bad name because they can sort of just get too big or spread too much. This is a one that is much more recommended and contained. I mean, the asters are such an amazing pollinator plant. We hate to not have them, and this is one that will behave very well in a smaller urban and suburban environment. It's easy to grow. It likes full sun with medium to dry soil, and it too is a pollinator magnet and a butterfly host plant. Showy goldenrod. This is another one that's a keystone species in our area, and this is one of the best varieties for a smaller urban or suburban yard. Upright, showy yellow flowers. It's clump forming, and it gets 1 to 3 feet tall. It is a non-aggressive species of goldenrod, and I feel like it's one of the most attractive species of goldenrod. Likes medium to dry soil. It is not the cause of hay fever. Hay fever is caused by ragweed, not goldenrod. That was a myth that I think maybe that blooms at the same time as this. So that's where that myth came from. Again, it blooms August, September. It is one of the top keystone plant species, one of the most important plants for our butterflies, pollinators, and birds. And it is a very important late season nectar source for the migrating monarch butterflies. Here's another type of blazing star. This is the rough blazing star with upright stalks that grow 2 to 3 feet tall. Again, you'll notice these plants that we're showing you, we're not saying this is, 8 to 10 feet tall. These are smaller plants that are suitable for any yard, any landscape. It likes full sun with medium to dry soil. It is drought tolerant, and it's a late summer bloomer and a favorite of butterflies, pollinators, birds, and hummingbirds. Here we have Anise Hyssop. This is one of my favorites. It's because it blooms so long. I have a big section of Anise Hyssop because there are so many pollinators on this all the time. It just literally is always a buzz. It's just amazing to watch that, and it blooms forever. I'll get my first blooms on it probably, well, this year it's kind of cold, but maybe early June. And man, that thing's going. I'm getting blooms through October. It's an amazing plant. Gets 2 to 4 feet tall. It's a pollinator magnet, like I said. You can also use this as an herb for cooking. The crushed leaves smell like mint or licorice. And it likes full to part sun, medium to dry soil, and it blooms, like I said, I've had mine bloom June through October. Loved by butterflies, pollinators, and hummingbirds. Here we have wild bergamot. This is a beautiful, highly adaptive plant. It's got fragrant lavender flowers. Pollinators love it. It's a wonderful nectar source that attracts bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. This grows 2 to 5 feet tall and prefers full to part sun, but adaptable soil can go from dry to moist, and blooms in the later summer, July, August, September. And it is the host plant to many species of butterflies. Here's Sweet Joe Pie weed. Sweet Joe Pie, I don't know why it's called a weed, poor thing, because it's beautiful. And this is a keystone. It has large pink flowers. This is the only nativar that we tend to want to. It's been found by people who are much more knowledgeable than we, like scientists and entomologists, and that straight species native is the most beneficial to our pollinators and insects. However, the straight species Joe Pye will get about 10 feet tall. And Joe Pye is such an important keystone plant and such a magnet for our pollinators and so good for our ecosystem that this is one plant that we recommend the nativar, which is the sweet Joe Pye, because it stays 4 to 6 feet tall, which is a little bit more desirable by the average homeowner. It's a favorite of butterflies and other pollinators. It likes partial to full shade, so it's a beautiful flowering plant for shadier areas, and it likes moist but well-drained soil, and it blooms from July all the way till frost. Here's a great ground cover for shade, wild ginger. These large heart-shaped flowers with a dense growth habit. So if you want to prevent weeds in your shady areas, under your trees, under your shrubs, put in some wild ginger, and that will prevent weeds. It can fend off invasive plants, and it prefers part to full shade, medium to dry soil, and this too is a butterfly host plant. So you prevent weeds and you're helping the butterflies at the same time. And it's beautiful. Okay, now we're going to go into our shrubs and trees. Do you want to take over, Peggy?
We got a little mixed up on our on our slides, but that's okay. That's okay. This is spectacular in the winter. It's a beautiful native shrub. It's the red twig dogwood. It has white flower clusters in May and June. Again, loved by pollinators, early bloomer. It has white berries in late summers, and that's a favorite of birds. So any native plants that provide berries, you're going to have visiting birds there. It's beautiful red foliage in autumn, and then these dramatic red stems in winter. It's just a spectacular looking shrub. It grows about 6 feet tall. I have a neighbor across the street that has a hedgerow of this, and it's just gorgeous. Medium to wet soil, but it's very moisture tolerant. So if you have a wet spot, again, consider this, and it's a butterfly host plant. Next slide, please. The Winterberry, another beautiful shrub, and this is a native holly shrub. So it's very important because a lot of people love hollies, but most of them are not native to our area. They're imported. But this is loaded with spectacular bright red berries in winter. And you've seen this before. The branches are often used in holiday decorations. Now you'll go to Michael's or Hobby Lobby or wherever you go and pay $5 a stem for this. Now, if you grow this, you might have to compete a little bit with the birds, but you can get your own free branches. So you can trim those back in the winter. It has abundant small white flowers in June and July. Its flowers attract many pollinators. And the berries, again, are important winter food source for the birds. It grows about 6+ feet tall, full sun to full shade. I mean, anytime we talk about full shade native plants, people get very excited because there's a lot of areas on all of our properties that aren't exactly in full sun or even partial shade, that we tend to leave just bare because we don't know what plants to plant. And these are some really wonderful plants that you can plant in shade. Medium to wet soil, it's a great shrub also for wet areas. And it's unbelievably a host plant for 34 species of butterflies and moths. Beautiful, beautiful shrub.
Can I just add something here? And don't forget, like, these shrubs, they're so important. I mean, the flowering, forbs that we went through, I mean, they're so dramatic, but many experts consider the shrub and the understory tree layer to be the most critical layer of our landscapes that provide the most biomass and the most food for our both our pollinators and our butterflies and moths. So feeding on them. So don't forget that. And even if you don't, if you just have a corner of your yard or someplace where you can put a native shrub, wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Okay, next slide. New Jersey tea. This is another gorgeous shrub. I don't think I have any, but you have these, Kathy, I believe. But I have some new space, so you never know what I'm going to put in there. I have the New Jersey tea is a beautiful, compact native shrub with these wonderful bright white flowers. Again, in the later season of the summer, when a lot of things are just fading, so you have this bright red showcase of flowers. This is a plant that's a shrub that's drought resistant. You can form a very attractive low-growing hedge if you like, because it only grows 2 to 3 feet tall. Full to part sun, medium to dry, well-drained soil. Again, a hummingbird attractor, pollinator butterfly, and again, another butterfly host plant, which is just wonderful. Whenever we can put shrubs in there, we'll host our butterflies. This is a vernal witch hazel, beautiful, beautiful, bright yellow flowers. Again, it's one of the first ones you're going to see. Now, we always see forsythia, but this is a really good alternative to the bright yellow forsythia, which is not a native plant. And it's one of the earliest flowering native shrubs. It flowers actually from late winter to early spring. So early pollinators would just be this would be a magnet to them to get some nectar. It grows 6 to 10 feet tall, full sun to partial shade, wet or dry sites. It's as I mentioned earlier, it's an alternative to the forsythia. Emerging pollinators will just be attracted to this, and that's when they really need some food. We have had just some mason bees emerge. Kathy and I got some mason bees, and one of the problems we had when we were going to release them or allow them to be released was that there's not enough flowers out there. There's not enough nectar. So this would be a great plant for our early spring mason bees as well, that they can forage this plant. Also a butterfly host plant. And by the way, deer resistant, just to throw that in again. Next slide, please. The common night bark and other gorgeous white shrub. It has arching branches. It's a native shrub for year-round interest. It has pinkish white flowers in May and June, yellow fall foliage, and peeling bark for winter interest. So it's a 4-season shrub that just, looks beautiful in all seasons. It grows about 5 to 10 feet tall. It can again be trimmed and formed into a hedge. So if you want to fill in some barriers around your property, this would be an ideal plant. It can be trimmed. I've mentioned that, into a hedge. It's a highly adaptable plant with erosion control. So this is a wonderful plant also if you have a slight hill, or if you have an eroding area in your garden and yard. So it would be an ideal plant for that situation. Full sun to shade again. I mean, you can't get much better than that. Dry to moist soil. How adaptable is this plant? And it's just spectacular looking, and it's loved by birds, butterflies, and pollinators, and it's a butterfly host plant. Sorry again, Lulu's at it. This is a arrowwood viburnum. It's another gorgeous shrub and can be a really lovely hedge row. It is creamy white lace, late spring or early summer flowers, probably more June. I have some of these and they're not quite ready to come yet because of our cold and dark spring that we've had. But it has really beautiful dark blue berries in late summer. The birds love them. It has a nice red autumn color. It's an alternative for some other things we'll talk about later. It grows 6 to 12 feet tall, full sun to partial shade, moist, well-drained soil, and the flowers are loved by butterflies, pollinators, and the late season berries are favored by the birds. Again, keeping them, fattening the birds up for the winter season. It's also a host plant. Elderberry. Well, this is where you might be fighting the birds for elderberries, because this is loved by humans and birds alike. It says it's really interesting because of the two pictures, because this is the white flowers that are in June and July. It is feather-like leaves. And then in late summer, you're going to get a profusion of dark purple berry clusters. It grows about 6 to 8 feet tall. As I mentioned, you're going to have to fight the birds for it. Full sun, medium to moist soil, favorite of pollinators and birds, and it's also a host plant for many butterflies. But isn't that a gorgeous clump of berries? You just want to reach in and grab them. Beautiful. All right, I have lots of stories about hydrangeas. I don't want to get off track too much, but this is the best hydrangeas you can get. Please, I know I've had them and I still have some, because again, we're not trying to disrupt your whole yard. We're trying to add beneficial plants for our ecosystem. But I had a number of the blue hydrangeas, and honestly, they never bloomed for me. They grew into kind of pretty bushes, but they never really bloomed. There absolutely no pollinators on them, no bees hover around them, nothing. They're dead, and they're very difficult to grow. Now, this is a native hydrangea, and I think this is the most exciting thing, because I've had hydrangeas in my yards for years. And when I first got this plant growing and maturing, I walked over to this plant and it was alive. It was alive with pollinators. It was noisy and and fun and fluttering, and hoverbees love it. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous plant, but it's not it hasn't been developed for just the blooms. It's
Hey,
an
Peggy.
all-round worthwhile
Peggy,
plant.
would you discuss the difference with them, with the difference between this and the Annabelle, you know, because that can become confusing.
Right. The Annabelle is often thought of as a native plant, and I thought it was too because, excuse me, it was discovered in Anna, Illinois. However, it is a nativar or a cultivar of the hydrangea. What we're more familiar with cultivar, but it's a nativar. It was adapted from the one plant in Anna, and all the Anna hydrangeas are basically clones of these few plants that were found in Anna, Illinois. They have spectacular blooms. I still have some in my yard because I just can't dig them up. They're just too pretty, and they kind of you don't want to kill a live plant necessarily. Only invasives, then we can kill those. But that's the difference of them. But the Annabelles are very big flowering blooms. This is more of a lace cap, sort of like a cap on your head kind of bloom. And it does well in shade. It blooms. It's long blooming, June to September. The nice thing compared to the Annabelles and some of the other hydrangeas is that it tolerates rain well. The other hydrangeas often flop over. The flowers are so big they flop over and they break the stems. So this doesn't do that. Plus, it's just alive with pollinators. This is one rabbit-resistant plant. If you're looking for that, this does extremely well if you have a rabbit problem. It's a host plant, and it has yellow foliage in fall with seed capsules. And but again, hydrangeas, remember, hydra. They're intolerant of drought, so you have to just keep them. You'll see them wilt, and just give them a drink of water, and they'll do fine. Anything else, Kathy, that I missed about that? Okay. All right, next slide, please. All right, we want these. Everybody wants these. The Dwarf Chicken Oak. This is a small dwarf oak tree. We talked about the oak being the keystone plant, the mighty oak, the king of the forest, the king of the ecosystem. This is a small oak that fits into suburban or urban landscape. They can be difficult to find, so we encourage you to, you know, if you're interested, to start looking for them. It's the best native shrub oak, so it stays more of a very large shrub rather than a big, massive oak tree that would take up. You have to have space for the mighty oak. It grows about 10 to 15 feet tall. Its dark green foliage turns to golden orange in fall. It produces acorns almost immediately, annually. And it's, as I mentioned, the #1 keystone plant in our area is the oak, and it's a host plant. I probably misspoke this earlier. The oak is a host plant for 456 species of butterflies and moths. It's just the king oak. That's what can we say? What more can we say about the oak tree? Spectacular. Next slide. The eastern redbud is another wonderful, beautiful native tree. A spring flowering tree. It's smothered in little pink blooms in early May. So you've seen some of those emerging. It grows about 15 to 30 feet tall. But again, get the species of redbud, eastern redbud. Part shade to shade. I have a pansy redbud. I mean, I have to tell you, I've not been, you know, I'm I'm a newbie in one way to this because I have made so many mistakes. You can see how old I am, but I made lots of gardening mistakes in my life, and one was planting a pansy redbud. Not, I wish I had done the eastern redbud. I had a choice, and I was dumb. Sorry. It grows in part shade to shade. At moist soil, it attracts birds and spring pollinators. It's a butterfly host plant, and quite fast growing. So I just love this plant and regret my other ones, but it'll be okay. When it's time to replace it, that's what it'll be replaced by. Next slide. The serviceberry, again, is another white tree, and we're going to talk a little bit about these, but these are really great substitutes for some of our invasive shrubs and trees. It's a 4-season ornamental interest. It grows to about 20 feet tall. It's delicate white flowers in April, early spring. It's smothered in delicious purple fruit in summer, loved by birds and humans alike. I never had a serviceberry, so I can't share that information with you. But it has an attractive fall color and great winter bark. Visited again by the early spring pollinators, which we need them for these early uh, bloomers, because they need the nectar for them in order to thrive. Host plant, part sun to full sun, moist but not wet soil. All right, now this is the mighty oak, what I call the mighty oak. This is a majestic, vital native tree, and if you have room for it, I encourage you to plant it. It grows 40 to 80 feet tall, depending on variety, full to part sun, moderate moisture, 20 species oaks. Sorry, I misspoke that. 20 species of oak are native to Illinois, but I think there's about 150 species in the United States. #1 keystone plant, and against host plant for 456 species of butterflies and moths. So do you want to take over for a little bit, and then I'll get into the invasives because we'll go back and forth, Kathy, is that good?
Perfect. Okay, so
I'm getting
now one of our
hoarse.
we can't forget about our maples, our beautiful maples, and we do have some, maples that are not necessarily, very desirable. People don't necessarily want to plant the sugar maples or the silver maples around. They're known to have, kind of aggressive root systems. They're messy. This is a much more beautiful species of our native maple species. It grows, it's a native ornamental tree. It grows 40 to 60 feet tall. You can't beat its fall foliage. It's just spectacular. These spring flowers are very important food for our early pollinators. So I know sometimes, you get annoyed, with when the flowers fall in the spring and they mess up a sidewalk or they're falling on your deck. But those early flowers of some of these trees are critical to our early pollinators. It takes sun to part shade. It prefers soil more on the moist side, and this also is a keystone plant and a host plant to many species of butterflies and moths. Birch trees are, again, a keystone plant, a host plant for 274 species of butterflies and moths. You can see just, how much space and how many critters are up there that we're not even aware of on the ground in some of these trees. There's ecosystems going on in the treetops that we're not even aware of. It has impressive, most species of birch have impressive bark. Many are multi-trunk with white or peeling bark. They're hardy and versatile trees that like full to part sun. They do prefer moist soil, and they can grow 40 to 70 feet tall. They get beautiful golden yellow fall foliage, and I can attest to this. I have 2 birch trees on my property, and they are just loaded with goldfinches in probably, I don't know if things are slow, but in a couple of weeks, they're going to be loaded with goldfinches. They love the seeds from this. So as we say, native plants are beautiful, and they look stunning in traditional suburban landscapes. As you could see from those slides, they're beautiful. I mean, they're beautiful plants. We want to plant them for their aesthetic value, but we need to plant them for their ecosystem value. And even if you don't have a lot of room, let's say you don't have 10 acres or even 150-foot deep lot. Let's say you have a 10-foot patio. Native plants can be good in containers too. If you have limited space, you can still help the pollinators. There's a number of native plants that do well in containers. And to make your container the most attractive and to get the most ecosystem buck out of it, do 3 types of plants in a container. Do a thriller, which is a focal point, Some good thrillers, taller plants that are a focal point would be the blue hyssop, the oxeye sunflower, anise scented goldenrod, zigzag goldenrod, or obedient plant. Do a spiller that cascades over the side. Some great spillers for a pot would be the purple poppy mallow or wild strawberry, and then do a filler, which fills in the middle between the two. And some great native choices for that would be the purple coneflower, butterfly weed, landsleaf coreopsis, foxglove, wild petunia, sky blue aster, and prairie dropseed grass. And we do want to mention, like, there are a few highly beneficial non-native annuals to plant in your pots. And I'm going to give an example of this. A couple years ago, I went outside, and it had to be late October and mid to late October, and I still had a pot of zinnias blooming. And there was a monarch butterfly on that all day. And again, we're talking mid to late October. There's nothing else was blooming anymore. Everything was pretty much done. And this late migrator had found this pot, and it was able to feed all day. Now, maybe that pot was critical in the success of that monarch making its way all the way to its winter area in Mexico. And so you never know. There's periods of time where a lot of our native plants, you know, there's spaces in between when they're blooming. We'll have like a big rush of spring bloomers, and then kind of a quiet period, and then a lot more of bloom, and then a quiet period, and then more of the fall bloomers. And so if you have some of these beneficial, highly beneficial plants in your pots, let me go back to that. That can help fill in. So they may not be able to use this to breed, but it will give them food to mate. And those the most beneficial are lantana, cosmos, zinnia, and alyssum. And what we want to do is create a pollinator-friendly habitat on our property. And there's many ways that we can do this. And I'm going to let Peggy talk about this, because she is the warrior of removing invasive species.
Thanks, Kathy. When we said, what can we do to help? This is one thing we can do to help besides, number one, plant native, is to remove invasive plant species. And again, an invasive species is an introduced plant from another part of the world, and oftentimes it's from Asia or Europe. Because it is not evolved here and has no natural checks and balance, it takes over our natural lands and snuffs out our native species. Especially if you're around this area at all, you're seeing this invasives just proliferating in our forest preserves and other undeveloped lands. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through with this because, again, I mentioned to you, I've been to blame for a lot of things. So sometimes I say I'm kind of a mass murderer, especially with pesticides. I have to claim that I did Mosquito Joe. Please, 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 please never do that. I did it for 2 years because I had dogs that I didn't want to give them heartworm, and that was just dumb, dumb, dumb. But the other thing that I really didn't plant but had on my property was the highly invasive Callery or Bradford Pear tree. Now, this is the most invasive plant we have in our area. It's carried by birds. It has become a weedy invader in our natural lands, especially our forests. It leaves out early, and then it prevents that understory of other plants growing underneath. So it just doesn't serve any purpose. And it even prevents other good plants from thriving. Can you go back, Kath, for a minute? Sorry. It's absolutely a host to nothing. It's a nothing plant. I'll say it's a very pretty plant, but there's other more beautiful plants because they always also provide benefit. It provides no value to our pollinators and birds. It ranks second only to habitat destruction as a threat to biodiversity. We have another one that's even more threatening. It has soft wood, it's easily damaged, and it has actually an offensive odor when in bloom. It blooms so soon, a lot of times you're not taking walks, but it doesn't smell good when it's in bloom too. Excuse me. And some states are beginning to ban the sale of these trees. If you look around, if you're taking a drive, if you're out by the forest preserve or undeveloped land, or even along farmlands or some sort of, again, undeveloped land, you are going to see these things sprouting up all over. If you look in our grasslands, I live in Orland Park. We have a beautiful grassland is just being overtaken by these Callery pears. The forest preserves of Cook County and DuPage County and Will County are being just inundated with these. You take a look out into the landscape and you'll see these pear-shaped white trees just all over the place. And what the problem is that they will snuff out the native plants. So that is because they are highly invasive. They grow. I had a Callery tree, and the reason I was so glad I didn't have to get rid of it because it fell down. And one time I'm looking out my front door and I see this big plant-like thing and my front, through my front window, and I go, oh, and I just had kind of recovered from a surgery or something. I thought, oh, somebody sent me a beautiful plant. I opened it up and there was a thunderstorm the night before and the Callery pear had totally fallen over on my property. Luckily, it didn't damage anything, but it was a good riddance to it. So anyways, please don't plant them. We're really trying to get some legislation going about banning them. There are some states that do ban it because it is just an invasive plant. And if you do take it down, then plant it with a native plant. So just a consideration. Next slide, please. Not my favorite tree, you can say. Now, these are two spectacular, great native alternatives to the Callery pear. We talked about the serviceberry, just a spectacular shrub-like tree, smaller, very just manageable, gorgeous, and also the flowering dogwood. So these are two beautifully white, early spring blooming trees that would be beneficial to our early pollinators, and certainly if you're looking for a beautiful white flowering tree, they're a great alternative to that pear tree. Next slide, please. Now, here is the most highly invasive plant in our area and across the United States. It's the burning bush, and a lot of people love these because of its spectacular, quite frankly, fall color. But it's another, quite frankly, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but it's really not very worthwhile plant. And probably needs to be removed. Its aggressive seedlings spread prolifically. It's forming dense thickets in our natural lands now, again, prohibiting growth of our more beneficial plants. It's the top cash crop for the $16 billion ornamental plant industry. And I bet the Bradford Pear comes in second. And why? Because they're fast growing, they're striking for a short period of time, and they're absolutely worthless to our environment and very almost harmful to our environment. It's listed as an invasive species in 21 states. Now, remember I said most of the native plants in our area are not attractive to deer? Well, I would like to see a herd come through and take these down, because this is very attractive to deer. So if you don't want deer, please don't plant it anyway, but that'll minimize your deer population if you're along a forest preserve or something like that. Next slide. Great alternatives. They were mentioned chokeberry and the arrowwood viburnum, and especially because people love that beautiful fall color, and they have the red color for the chokeberry and the lovely copper color for the arrowwood viburnum. So please consider those as alternatives to a burning bush. And if you're going to get rid of that invasive plant, consider that if you want the color, one of these two lovely shrubs instead. Next slide, please. Okay, you can go. I'm losing my voice a little bit now, Kath.
All righty. So some other things that we can do to create better, create good pollinator habitat on our property is As we said, choose native plants that provide pollen and nectar through the seasons. Include some butterfly and moth host plants, which we were talking about when we were going through the plants. Minimize, I don't know how that's happening, I didn't do that. Minimize hybrid or native cultivars. We mentioned one native cultivar, the Joe Pye, that we do recommend because of its height, but when possible, get the straight species. Plant in clusters rather than a single specimen, so it's easier for our pollinators and beneficial insects and birds to find. Reduce the size of your lawn. We're not saying get rid of your lawn, but try to reduce it a little bit. And, you know, our motto is if you have place to plant a shrub, wonderful. If you can put in a native tree in your parkway, that's great. If you put in a 6x6 pollinator garden, remove a little lawn and put in a pollinator, thank you very much. You're helping our ecosystem. And choose a variety of spring, summer, and fall blooming plants to provide pollinator food throughout the seasons.
Kathy, mention how you tell the difference between a nativar and a native plant. Because
yeah, that's a good point, Peggy. So a nativar, if you, let's say you were to go into a store and you just see something that says Anise Hyssop, and there's no subtitle or subname in parentheses, that would be, and the Latin name is under it. I think it's Agastache foneculum or something like that. So that would be, but if it says Anise Hyssop and then there's another cutesy name in parentheses like Blue Fortune, that would mean that it's a cultivar.
Or nativar.
Or a nativar.
Or nativar.
Which basically a nativar is a cultivar of a native plant. Other things we can do: avoid the use of pesticides and herbicides whenever possible. Avoid using landscape fabric, rock, or thick mulch. I was blown away when I learned that a lot of our native butterflies and moths, they will feed off of leaves in the trees, but then they will fall to the ground and burrow to finish their metamorphosis into a butterfly or moth. So if there's landscape fabric or rock or thick mulch, they can't get into burrow, and they'll just die off there and won't finish their formation. So the best thing is to use leaf mulch, or just have an understory under your trees, under your beds, some planting beds where you have other flowering plants and shrubs and natural weed barrier of ground covers and plants, or leaf mulch, which is basically ground up leaves, and you can do it yourself, or you can buy leaf mulch at some garden centers. When possible, use native plant ground covers to prevent weeds. Mention that. Let fallen leaves remain in your garden beds until spring. Many pollinators overwinter in leaf litter. So that is true. So if you're gonna rake your leaves, try to rake most of them into your planting beds until spring. I know you can't leave it on the lawn, but if you move them into your planting beds, you'll be protecting pollinators, and it will break down. Most of them will break down by the following spring, and what's left will prevent weeds from coming up, and it'll break down and fertilize your soil. So it's a win-win move, and you don't have to do as much work. Wait till after Mother's Day for your first lawn mow. This helps spring foraging pollinators and emerging insects. Believe it or not, some of those violets in your lawn, if you don't have a chemical induced lawn, or dandelions or clover, some of those are critical plants for early emerging pollinators, especially on a year like this where some of our other plants are kind of slow because of our weather. Wait until spring to do a yard cleanup. Many pollinators overwinter in your old stems. So our solitary bees will go into the old stems of plants. So don't rush, so don't clean them up in the spring, or if you do, cut them, leave 12 to 18 inches of them for our pollinators. And really, really important is to help reduce light pollution, which harms our birds and our insects. Use motion sensor lights, yellow or soft white LED lights outdoors, and shine them downwards, not upwards, creating more light pollution. According to Doug Talamine, if anybody wants more information on this and is not familiar with him, I would highly recommend reading his book, Nature's Best Hope. In the past, we have asked one thing of our gardens, that they be pretty. Now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water. Doug Talamine started a great grassroots movement called Homegrown National Park, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. And once you put in your native plants and you have your pollinator garden or your shrubs that pollinators love, you can be part of what we like to think of as a pollinator corridor. Let's all help get together and create a pollinator corridor, which basically a corridor is a pathway of little gardens along the way for our pollinators to use to forage and mate, and that connects larger habitats such as parks and natural lands. And so our home gardens can be like stepping stones between larger places so that our pollinators can move about. And every plant counts, even if it's you just have room for one plant or one shrub or a small pollinator garden. Every plant counts. Any size garden can become a vital way station in a pollinator corridor and can mean the difference between a successful mating and breeding of a pollinator. Corridors also allow pollinators to migrate to other climates or avoid threats such as pesticides. And then going back to this great call to action that Doug Talamine has, it's a grassroots call to action, and we like that because we consider Sag Moraine a grassroots movement as well. All volunteers just trying to spread the word. What he's trying to do is get more people to start a new habitat by planting native plants and removing invasive species and create a homegrown national park. The ultimate goal is to add 20 million acres of native plantings in the United States. This is the largest cooperative conservation project ever conceived or attempted. Every plant counts. Put in some native plants and get on the Homegrown National Park map. And we have that link in the chat as well. So where do you find native plants? You can order them online, mail order. A couple places that I highly recommend are Prairie Nursery in Wisconsin and Prairie Moon Nursery in Minnesota. You can also go to local plant sales. You can go to Illinois Native Plant Society website, and they'll have a list of all of the plant sales in Illinois. And you could come out to our native plant sale, which will be June 4th from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Moraine Valley Community College, parking lot D3. We're going to have many, many, many varieties of native plants available for purchase that day. You can find out more about this plant sale at our website, sagmoraine.org. And we're starting something new at Sag Moraine, and I'm really excited about this. What we want to do is post photos on our website before and after, or just photos of your native plants. And we want to showcase how beautiful native plants are and how beautiful a native plant garden can be. And we want people to be able to see it on the website, be inspired by it, learn by it, see what other people are doing in their gardens, see what's worked for them, see what's beautiful, give them ideas. What we try to do at Sag Moraine is provide the education of why we should do this, and also help in how to do it. So please, when you send us photos of your existing native gardens, or if you put in a native garden this year, send us before and after photos of that, and we're going to start doing posting these on our website. So the link is also in the chat of our form that you can fill out with your photos and your town. That's the only information that we ask. And you can download your photo right there. And we're really excited about putting this on the website to kind of help people out and inspire people to plant native. and they can see their neighbors, you know, photos and get some good ideas. And consider helping Sag Moraine. You can help Sag Moraine by becoming a member. It's $25 a year to help us continue our work, make a donation, or volunteer for us. And one thing that we really need, that we would love if you would do for us, is we're starting a new program called Become an Ambassador. We need more people to become ambassadors for our pollinators, for our birds, for our ecosystem, and for our future. And whether you're wanting to just learn how to, you know, how do we get this message out to more people? Again, we're a grassroots movement. We're all volunteers, and we're just trying to donate a little bit of time to spread the word. And I can't tell you how many people I've, you know, just friends or people that I meet, and I tell them just a little bit about this, and they'll look at me like, oh, more people should know about that. And it's, yeah, if more people knew that we could do just a little bit and make a big difference and have great impact, they would do it. If they knew that they didn't have to convert their whole property to native plants, or if they knew that they didn't have to spend 20 hours working in their yard on weekends, if they knew that they could just do a little bit and really be helping, more people would do it. And so we need to spread the word about this. And so whether you're, but what do you say to people? How do you bring it up? What, you know, how do you convince them? What is the message? What are the reasons they should plant native? What are some good plants for them to plant? All these are things that it's kind of hard to know where to start and how to approach somebody. So we're going to start a program called Become an Ambassador. And this is something that we're going to be forming over the next few months this year. We want to get this up and running later this year, to teach people how to approach this with somebody, how to go out and talk to your neighbor, how to talk to your neighbors, to your friends, to your family, even go to your HOA or go to your community, your town, depending on how big you want to go. What do you say? We're gonna teach people how to broach the subject, what to say, how to promote this in an easy way. This isn't an overly time-consuming thing. Just to give some ideas, we're going to be, you know, doing a few training sessions to give people ideas of how to get the conversation open. And then you'll always have the backup of Sag Moraine and written materials and so on. So anybody who's interested in becoming part of this ambassador program that we're going to be starting, please contact us through our contact form at sagmoraine.org, and we'll keep you updated when we get this program up and rolling. And with that, Mary, if you want to pop on, do we have any questions, Mary? Another member of our team, Mary Gelder. I know she's out there in the dark somewhere.
Yes, here I am. I was clicking away and it wasn't catching me. So yes, there are some questions here. And hello, everybody. We have a question about wild strawberry, wild strawberries. Will they choke or crowd out other plants?
I have had no problem with that. I have a ton of wild strawberry in a shady part of my yard, and it's wonderful. It provides great ground cover. It's also easy to remove. I have personally had no problem with it choking out other plants.
I believe it's rhizome, so it's on the top of the surface.
It's robust, but I wouldn't call it aggressive.
Right.
Okay. Here's a good trick question for you. Are yellow jackets native or non-native?
Whoa.
That's a good question. My hunch would be that they're native.
My hunch is that they're non.
All right, we got to find out. We got to find out.
We'll
Somebody
find out.
Google this.
We'll find out and let you know if we don't know. I think they're imported. We have to be. Only good things are native.
I
That's all
gotta
right.
find out. But, and you know, the thing is about wasps, I mean, you know, the reason why we don't like wasps is because they give bees a bad name, because people get stung by yellow jackets, and many people think it's bees, and people are afraid of bees, but yet we have to save our bees. I know yellow jackets and other wasps have a very important place in our ecosystem, and we need them too. But I just wish they would like not be so annoying.
All right, let's not pick on them too much. They do
I
have
know.
they do have a place in the.
Yes, they do.
All right.
Okay, I found out.
Oh, you did? I was looking
The
it up.
North American,
was
yeah,
that.
Google. Thank you for Google. The yellow jackets are native to North America. So, because remember, and I should have known, we had a discussion about this earlier. They are pollinators too. We just have to try and not aggravate them. But they're worthwhile and they're pollinators, and they are native to North America.
And they're very important at getting rid of some of our nuisance bugs as well. So
Here's another one for you. You were talking about birches. Are river birches native? And she understands that they are more disease or insect resistant.
they are more disease and insect resistant. And technically, river birches are not technically native to this particular area per se, but just shy north of here, like up in Minnesota. And they do tend to thrive here more than some of our other birches that are more prone to the bronze birch borer. So and they do feed the same caterpillars as the birches, such as like the what is it, the paper birch and so on, that are native here but are much more disease prone. So I love river birches. I have 2 of them on my property.
You know, a comment about that is that, remember, when we talk about non-natives, we're really talking about imported species. There's a lot of species that may not, because we're a prairie state, and that might not have been here, but are in Wisconsin, Minnesota, around our area. So we don't claim to be that narrow, that you can't have native species, or it's so important to have native species that are native to the United States, not necessarily just to Illinois. So just food for thought.
Can you let us know how to control aphids on milkweed plants? Nancy says,
do you want to take that, Peggy, or do you want me to take it? Those wonderful little orange aphids.
Nancy says she's using wet paper towels to wipe them off, but was wondering how to keep them away.
I don't
The wet paper towels, you can spray it with, like, you know, water and dish soap, but then that's going to make it unattractive to the monarchs.
Okay.
I will say that in my experience, and if anybody has a different opinion of this, I would welcome your comment. But I have those orange aphids every year on my milkweed. I have never had it damage the plant, and I have never had it get in the way of breeding monarchs. So even though they appear to be a nuisance, I don't really feel like they do much damage.
Plant more milkweeds, and some will
That's a good point, Mary.
Some won't.
So there's more to go around.
Yeah. Are all moths good? Are all moths good?
All of our native moths are good. We do have some nasty moths that are invasive, imported, coming from plants and crates from other countries that have decimated some of our native species. But our native moths, yes, they're highly beneficial in our ecosystem.
Okay, how about dandelions? They're imported. Should we really leave them?
You go for this one, Peggy.
Well, I think that you should leave them, I mean, as long as it's not taking over your entire lawn, because they are early spring pollinators. I don't know that. I believe you that you're saying that they were imported. At one time, they were highly desirable before lawns. Lawns were imported from Europe, but that's what people used to have is dandelions in their front yards. So the pollinators love them. The bees love them. I don't think they're going to do any harm. I don't have a
People
lot
used to think that they were like, that was 100 years ago, that was considered to be an attractive lawn, you know, grass with dandelions. That was the look, that was the go-to. And then our horticulture industry.
Well, they wanted European lawns.
European.
And then Scott's fertilizer came into the picture. And they developed weed killer, and the dandelions were the first to go with the weeds. So they were highly desirable. It was not lawns were not of any import. They were I mean, I have them, a lot of people, but they suck up water, they suck up fertilizer. They don't provide any benefit to our pollinators or insects for the most part. And dandelions are much more beneficial to our ecosystem. And I think that's all we can really say about that. And if you'd have to put pesticides in order to get rid of them, unless you wanted to dig them out individually.
Now, I will say that our native plants are much more beneficial. Our spring native plants are much more beneficial to our pollinators than dandelions are when you look at the quality of the nectar that they're getting from it. But we don't have enough. We don't have enough native plants, native spring blooming plants in our neighborhoods. Sometimes the only thing, you know, if you can, you know, look for down the block, the only thing that you're going to find on your block that you could see that a pollinator emerging in late April could possibly use is going to be a dandelion. You know, I mean, a lot of areas don't have it. So if we could get more true native plants back in our landscapes, native spring blooming plants, that would be way better than the dandelions. But for right now, they're better than nothing, and they're better than the sod.
So someone is asking about the foraging friendly native plants. You mentioned the serviceberry and the chokecherry. Were there any others that would be good for humans to eat? Oh yeah, the elderberry. Oh, can I say something about the elderberry too? You need to be sure, don't eat that fruit raw. A lot of people have digestive issues with that, and it's just better if you heat it first. Heat it, and then you can eat away.
Make syrups or jams. Yeah.
Right. Or dry it, dehydrate them, make a nice crunchy berry.
There are a lot of native plants that are used for medicinal reasons that I'm more aware of. You know, they'll use them in teas, you know, or supplements like ginkgo. Well, not ginkgo, that's like not native, but what's the one I'm thinking of? St. John's wort, or you know, dandelion. I mean, we've said that's not native, but people eat dandelion. And so there's a number of native plants that are used more in teas and herbal supplements, much more so than I can think any that are like part of our edible diet.
Is that wild strawberry? Do those strawberries, are they edible?
They're edible, yeah.
Great. Speaking of stinging insects, this person had a hornet's nest in her backyard last summer. How can she prevent hornets from nesting in the yard without damaging other pollinators? Any ideas?
Well, we had quite a long discussion about this earlier, and there was a couple of different thought patterns. And I had found some information, and this is, it's really not, you know, you'd have to kind of figure this out, because one source said, put a paper bag with other paper bags, or, you know, crunchy plastic bags. I guess you don't want to really keep them, but you can use them for the hornet's nest, tie it up and and place it by the old hornet's nest. And the hornets will not like other wasps or hornets around their area because they'll think the crunching is another nest. Now, I looked that up and did a little bit more research, and there's some people that say yes and some people that say no. So it's kind of up to you whether or not you're going to use that. I also did some research, and you can use like essential oil, mint, especially mint flavor, or plant minty plants around an area that the hornets are deciding that that's their favorite place, and that might be something. Kathy had an experience that she might want to share with us, and so Mary has some ideas as well. So that's my 2 cents. It's pretty difficult besides just hoping that they're not around someplace that they're going to be cumbersome to you or invasive to you. If they're in a part of the yard, that let them be, but most of the times they're not in a conducive spot unless you have a large property.
You've had issues with those over the years, haven't you, Mary?
Well, I don't have an issue with hornets per se, but the stinging, I get a lot of wasps, and I don't mind the wasps so much because they do have a place. They take care of some of the tomato pests that I get from time to time. But the wasps this time of year is when they are nesting. And so if you can catch them this time of year and move their nests someplace else, like down the street to the forest preserve or something like that, if there's a place that you can put them in a paper bag and take them, and your only opportunity is going to be right now, this week, because they go dormant in colder weather. Once it gets above 55 or so, then they can fly around and they can sting, and they'll defend their nests. But if you can remove their nests when it's cooler, I go out in the morning when they are building their nests in my electrical outlets. My outdoor electrical outlets is their favorite place, and I don't want them in there. And so I'll just remove the nests when it's cold early in the morning, and they eventually get the idea and find someplace else to nest. But you only have another week where you're going to be able to do that. So gotta be quick.
And Kathy, tell them about your story about the porch.
Oh yeah, so I had wasps, yellow jackets behind I have a stoop in the back. It's like 2 steps coming up into the house, and there was a space that formed between the stoop and the house. And one year I had yellow jackets nesting back there. So every time you came in and out the back door, there were yellow jackets flying around. Well, not the ideal situation. And I called an expert on this, and this is why, if you really have a problem, unless you're able to do something like Mary said, but and if you can see the nest, and it's like a paper net, and you can see where it is, and it's under your eave, and you can see it. But if you just know there's a lot of bees and there's a nest nearby, but you can't see it, always call a professional, because I called somebody out, and they said they couldn't really see behind that stoop. But if they were to go spraying, if they were in my wall, that spray could have made them chew or burrow further into the brick or the mortar and get into my house. So their recommendation was to just try to use that door less for the year, and they won't rebuild in the same place next year. They didn't recommend spraying there because they couldn't see what they were doing, and they didn't want to try it. They didn't want to force them into the house. So just a thought too, if you don't actually see the nest, don't just go spraying. Then I would call a professional to make sure that you're not creating a bigger problem.
Okay, any other questions? We've exhausted the list here. If anyone has something else to ask, put it in now.
All righty. Well, thank you all very much for attending tonight. And you know, thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest in this, and thank you so much. Sag Moraine thanks you from the bottom of our heart for every native plant you plant this spring.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening.